get started here in just a few moments, so I know there's other people registered who'll probably be coming, and they'll just file in. There's plenty of, if you haven't seen, there's plenty of refreshments on the, I'm not sure what side that is, but if you go out the doors here to the left. So really, really happy to be doing this event in person. The last few years, we've had to do that online, and it was fine, but it's really nice to start doing more events in person. We're excited to be in this facility in particular because they had it open pre-COVID there, and really haven't had a chance to use it as much. And so really thankful to the university for helping us with this event, providing these facilities. And before we get started, I'd like to bring up here to the podium Mark Johnson from the Innovation Center, just to welcome us from the university. So Mark, if you could come up for just a minute.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Community Engagement Center. Chancellor is gone this week, as well as the Provost, as well as the Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs. So they asked if I'd welcome you today, and so welcome again to the Community Engagement Center. Did want to point out, and I told Derek I'd be brief, but one of my missions here is to invite you next week to the Community Engagement Facility Showcase and Tours. So next Thursday from 4 to 6 p.m., June 23rd, we're having a facility showcase and tour here. There will be, I believe there's going to be hors d'oeuvres and soft drinks and a cash bar as well. So, and door prizes and so forth. And so the idea is to really want to promote this facility, show everybody what's here, what's going to be available, the ability to use it, to rent it, and then showcase things like the office space that's available. There's a co-working space here. There's the university print shop that has services available for the community, and all of those good things. So again, love to see all of you here if you can make that next Thursday from 4 to 6 p.m. I'm going to throw a quick shameless plug in here for the Innovation Center as well. Dr. Shokan Basu next Wednesday from 2:30 to 4 o'clock at the Innovation Center is holding what is called the Modern Data Summit, or Transforming Data into Competitive Advantage Summit. And he's inviting some data experts from a company called the Modern Data Company from California in to do a presentation on data and data transformation and how you use data to make business decisions. So I think you're going to, if you're able to attend, I think you'd find it incredibly interesting if you were involved or associated with making decisions for your company through data analytics, or if you have someone within your companies, please let them know about that as well. And you can find information about that on the Innovation Center website, or on, I think, even the Chamber website, I believe, as well. So that's it. Enjoy the conference and the regular sessions. Thank you. Thanks, Derek.
All right, again, thank you, Mark, and the university for hosting us. I have a bad habit of just jumping right into things without introducing myself, so I apologize. I guess I assume people know me, but I'm Derek Dioria, the Director of the Walworth County Economic Development Alliance. We've made this event the State of the County annual event, and I think we're going on year 6 now, and people really enjoy it. It's a really good way to hear from the administrator and just hear all the good work. We have a really great sound foundation, economic foundation at the county, a lot of good projects, a lot of good community support, so we're really happy about that. And so what we also did was we combined a collaborative event series that we've been doing for the last probably almost 4 years, I think now, with all the chambers in the county and the visitors bureaus. And so hopefully I don't forget anybody, but it's the Whitewater Chamber and Visitors Center. It's East Troy Visitors Center, Elkhorn, it's Delavan, Geneva Lake West, and of course Lake Geneva. So hopefully I didn't forget anybody. And then also the Walworth County Visitors Bureau. And so we try to do, at least pre-COVID, 3 of these events a year, and move them around the county, and we just help support each other with putting the program together, with promoting it. We'll also do after hours events, same thing, kind of a joint effort. So hopefully you've attended some of those, or you've seen that in the past, but you'll see more of those events coming up as well. So just want to thank the chambers for helping promote this and just being great partners. So with that, I'd like to welcome our speakers today. We do have Mark Luberta, who has been, I think this is your third session now for us, and you're in your third year, about halfway through. But we're really happy to have Mark here to just go over what, some of the things that have happened, where they're at, some of the things related to COVID, some of the funding that they've gotten federally, and where some of that's going. So really happy to be able to have Mark present here, and then also ask Tom Walsh from the Department of Workforce Development, and he's participated as well for at least 3 or 4 years. Really appreciate him coming down and giving us his economic perspective, but also through the lens of labor and workforce development. So with that, I'd like to welcome Mark to the podium here.
Thank you, Derek. Good morning, everyone. This is just how I remember college, nobody in the front row. So I appreciate the opportunity to come today and talk about the county. The county's a large organization. We're involved in a lot of different things, and I'm going to try to touch on sort of a broad brush scope of them. Today, I think to give some context, the county has an operating budget of about $174 million with another 27 in capital, so it's a $200 million enterprise. We have about 850 employees. That's our sort of full-time equivalent count. If you got bodies with the part-timers, we're getting closer to 1,000. Most of the biggest group of them is in the Sheriff's Department with 210. HHS is 190. The Lakeland School and the nursing home are both around 100. So we're a large organization, and it definitely keeps us very busy in the kinds of things that we do. With that size operation, the revenue streams are very critical for how we can maintain business. Our biggest constraint as a local government are the levy limits. Last year, the state statute limited our ability to grow our revenues to 1.12%. That's not a lot of ability to grow. We're only allowed to grow by the net growth in the equalized value. At 1%, you're only keeping up with the services you're providing to the new development. There's no room for growth in the existing customers we serve. If a business had to operate like that, it would be very difficult to grow. Businesses rely on continued growth. And that's one of the probably biggest constraints we need to deal with at the county. Because, as you know, technology doesn't stand still, and you need to spend money to get that. If you look at, for example, the software, if you've tried to buy software 10 years ago when you bought software, you bought a piece, you put it on there, and you just sort of rode it for a while. And then you maybe upgraded it periodically, skipped an upgrade to save some money, and they don't sell software like that anymore. You pay a lot less for the software up front, but you've got this annual maintenance agreement that is now significantly more than it ever was. And as that market area changed, that hits our operating budget, and we don't have the flexibility in our revenue stream to accommodate things like that. Similarly, there's new technologies out there that we can't afford to not participate in because of some of the efficiencies and the data it gets you. 10, 15 years ago, when you bought a police car, or in this case a sheriff's squad, you didn't have to put an automatic license plate reader on them now. those are essential pieces of equipment to sheriff's departments and police departments. But no revenue growth. Since right around 2010, we've had these levy limits on. And so all this new technology, drones, you didn't have to own a drone when you were a local government 15 years ago. They're relatively essential now. We have two, and trained people with the proper licensing that use them in the county. Land use and resource management has one. They just spent as a project taking aerial shots of the entire coastline of one of the lakes in the county at a request from the Lake District, but it's also really valuable information for that regulation and the land use around there. Sheriff's Department also has one that's very critical for what they do. But again, we've been under levy limits this whole time, so bringing in new technology means we have to fit it in within the constraints of those kinds of things. Nonetheless, what you're going to hear from me today as I talk about a variety of things is the progress that we continue to try to make in the budget overall in different areas. And so I'm just going to bounce around a little, and then I'll probably finish talking about the ARPA funding because it's such an unusual thing to happen, to have a big influx of cash like that the federal government has provided. One area where we've really made some progress and are trying to make sure that we stay ahead and keep moving is in the area of parks. Next week, our Public Works Committee will be receiving the final draft of the next comprehensive park plan for the county. It's an update to the 2014 version. There aren't a tremendous amount of changes built in there. It did spend a lot of time sort of updating what had happened, not only for ourselves. It included some new demographic projects and resource changes. It included key accomplishments of the county, the Geneva Lakes Conservancy, the Kettle Moraine Land Trust, and the other municipalities that have added park features since 2014. So in that, it includes the acquisition of White River Parks, the expansion of conservation lines, particularly by the Geneva Lakes Conservancy, and some conversions of lands to prairies. Knowing that we're making that move, one thing that I proposed emphasizing to the county board in the 2022 budget, which eventually was incorporated in the budget, was beginning to do a little more development in our parks from the capital side. We've got about $3 million scheduled for some upgrades in each of the different parks between 2023 and 2026. We've got over $1 million scheduled for development and upgrading of the White River Park barn structure. We're not exactly sure the extent that it's going to be developed, but there's either some more broad concepts or some more narrow ones. So we have to work out the plan first, but we've already got some funding in to get that going. Natureland Park needs a new parking lot replacement. Price Park needs the same thing, and the White River Park parking lot needs to not only be improved, but it needs to be expanded. Knowing that the comprehensive park plan calls for about another 400 acres to be acquired and over the next 20 or so years, and in potentially adding one more major passive park. I proposed last year that we begin adding $250,000 from our end-of-year reserves, because we're usually very fiscally conservative and end up with some resources left in the budget at the end of the year. And we've been adding that then starting with last year, and now we'll continue to do that, so that by 2025 we'll have sort of $1.5 million set aside for when we're ready and see the opportunity for bringing new lands in. keeping things going on the operating side, maintaining what we have, but also planning to expand what we have going in the parks. We're probably going to be facing some of that same need on the roads side of things. One thing we put in this year's budget was an enhanced evaluation of our roads. If you know much about how roads are sort of evaluated in Wisconsin, the state has something called PASER that every community does, and it's basically a visual assessment of each of your roads. You drive around the roads, you look at the nature of the cracks and crevices, and if you're sort of trained in what to look for, you can evaluate each road and each section of road on a 1 to 10 scale. Our county has a very high standard. We try to keep our average at above a 7. That's very good. 10 is basically a new road. 1 is basically rubble. When you get down, the real breaking point is right between sort of about 4 and 3. When you're getting close to 4, you can still do maintenance and it will stay. Once you're below that, once you're hitting about 3, you've probably got too much water and stuff seeping into your base, and you probably have to tear it out, fix the base, and start. So maintenance is really key. And so to understand where we were, we took it one step further this year, which I'm very glad we did. And we hired a firm that traveled all of our roads, but used, I believe it's called LiDAR. So they basically looked beneath the roads and were able to give us an assessment of the subbase, which you can't do by looking at the top. You're making guesses as what the subbase is by what you're seeing on top. And they also were able to evaluate the shoulders much more better. So it did confirm a lot of what we knew, but we found a couple sections of road that seemed fine on top, but we now know the base means they're going to need to move up further in the list because they're not going to last where we are. And they were also able to do a projection of, at our current funding level, which has been, it was set over 10 years ago. We've been funding with about $2.7 million a year for new roads and road reconstruction, and then about another $500,000 in maintenance. We're doing chip sealing and things like that so that we preserve the structure we have. The consultants who put this study together said, you probably don't have quite enough, that where costs are going and taking some of these new evaluations into consideration, you're probably looking at adding as much as another $1 million per year. Not something we can probably do all of a sudden from the get-go, but that's what we'll figure out in the budget process, how to increase that so we can maintain our high standards. Most counties don't have an average road score of 7. That's a high score, but that's a standard that we try to hold ourselves to. So that's going to be a pressure that the county has to address. Another one, not the road and the structure itself, but on the road is our shared ride transit system. That's a fairly new service that we've had. Started in around 2017. It was going gangbusters when it first started. The first meeting where I was here in 2020, I was just sort of shadowing Dave Brettel, my predecessor. They actually approved a resolution that increased the budget by a few $100,000 because the demand was just continuing to go up and up and up. Then the pandemic hit and it sort of fell to the bottom. We're back on that same trajectory as we were, but we haven't reached that level. But in that process, we did a couple very thorough evaluations of the service because we're trying to work with the state to be able to modify the contract so the provider could continue to provide it during the pandemic, because there were some real challenges in operating that kind of service during a pandemic. And what we learned, looking at the two counties that are most parallel to us, which from the nature of service, that would be Ozaukee and Washington counties. If you do a sort of per capita basis, you could see even at that peak level we were at the end of 2019, entering into 2020, we could expect as much as another 60% growth in the service. And So that's another $700,000, and consideration of, do we need to expand the hours? Do we need to expand the number of buses? You know, right now we're sort of stopping after first shift is done and gone home to work. Whereas if you look around the state, some of the smaller communities that have similar shared ride services, they focus on some hours that run later and serve other shifts of business, or are providing rides that are helping other components of the economy, such as the restaurant side of things, so that workers and patrons can get to and from and be able to use shared rides. So that's going to be an interesting development as we move forward, but we're continuing to try to make progress there. One thing we learned in that study, we're the only major system that actually makes the provider provide the vehicles, which is challenging. We're about to go out for bid again, and I can sort of see why they're not doing it. The other providers, counties, for example, provide the vehicles, and someone else just sort of operates and has the employees, has the drivers. Because we're probably looking about 20 vehicles, about $1.5 million investment someone would have to make to get a 3-year guaranteed contract. Hard to get somebody to want to do that. So we're actually in the process of, with a plan where we're going to have those vehicles to be able to offer in the next RFP, so that we can hopefully get some better competition. But that's something that I think if you look at where the county is today and where we're headed, that's one of those services that's going to be a brand new sort of expansion of service. It's all come on during the levy limits, and it will continue to grow, and we're going to have to figure out how to make that happen within those levy limits. I think another area worth talking about some, switching away sort of from structure and capital, the health department within the Health and Human Services within the next week or so will be releasing their community health assessment. I think this is a really interesting document. If you know much about public health, this is something the statutes expect each community to do every 5 years or so, where you really stop and do a deep dive into what is the status of the health of your population and what makes them tick, what works well for them, what stresses them. And it's a very extensive process. It's not just the department sort of sitting there trying to put their guests together. They do a lot of focus groups, a lot of surveying. They've spent a significant amount of time pulling this together. And I've got a couple snippets here I'm going to share with you. I'm not allowed to give this to anybody because it's not released yet, but I was able to get a copy last night. And I think some of the main strengths and areas of improvement, I don't think will, they'll seem very normal to you, because this is what your community thinks, and I think many of you will have the same opinion. The strengths of the health and well-being in Walworth County is the natural landscape of the county. It's one of the things that gives people a good feeling. They feel we have safe, high-quality schools, very safe communities. They like the geographic location, and the tourism industry comes up as one of the things that people like, that give them a good feeling about the positive aspects of our community and our county. The areas where they talk about needing improvement, housing, both in affordability and availability, access to care and health care, transportation, lack of social connectedness. I think particularly doing this survey during the time of the pandemic really emphasizes that one showing up. Mental health services and some of the siloed municipalities. Access to health care was a need that really spanned across all of the demographics of the study, and with physical health being highlighted as a key stressor among the residents. But there are some things that we're working on that will really be helping that area when I get into talking about Another area where we're going to see some change, and she's not here today, but I want to call it out. You're all probably familiar with the Lakeland School. Walworth County is very lucky to have that as a facility. There's only 2 CDEBs in the state, 2 counties that operate them, and ours is by far a unique structure. And for the last over 20 years, it's been run by Tracy Moat, and you know, she was instrumental in getting us the new facility, and she's led it since its construction. And she is retiring at the end of this year. But Tuesday night, the county board approved and confirmed my appointment of Matthew Hiddle as the new director to take over for her. He is the special ed coordinator at the Clinton School Districts, and we're really excited to be able to bring him on board. I liked what I saw at the interviews, and the thoughtful planning and the experience, and the licensure, and the education that he brings to the position. I think it would be great for the school. But what I really liked is what I saw in the passion he had for special needs children, and that had just been the focus of his career. And I think he will be able to work well in the school for us. Besides all of that experience, he's also 22 years retired from the Wisconsin Army National Guard, where he did, I think, 2 tours in Iraq and 1 in Afghanistan. So probably tough enough for the school, I would like to think. So, but that was just announced Tuesday, and I wanted to help sort of get that word out, so I thought I would share it with each of you. One change that you'll see in the county, it's been developing over the course of this year, and I think as we go into the 2023 budget, I'll be proposing some expansion as well. We're trying to up our game in the communications area. I created, the county board approved it in the budget, a half-time communications officer, where we could try to get better engaged in social media, improve our websites, standardize our press releases, and really enhance how we're engaging with the community as a whole. It's been very well received by the departments, having sort of a professional communicator to be able to help them guide their messages. We're just about to release some internal operating procedures so that we can give formal guidance for how we move forward with that sort of strategic media plan. And in the 2023 budget, I expect to be seeing that half-time position move to a full-time position. We're just finding that we can get more information out about our services and express ourselves better and make sure people don't have to come to these meetings just to hear what's happening at the county. That we've really got some engagement going. And it seems to be making a difference already just with the halftime effort that we have. And so I think that will be key going forward, where you'll be hearing more about the county in more places than you're used to seeing, and hopefully generate some discussion throughout the community in that as well. I think another area that I want to talk about, because it warrants evaluation, and I had to be very, very careful, I thought, how I expressed this to the county board, which was our Lakeland Healthcare Center. It's also, you drive by it, it looks like a new facility, but it's about 20 years old. And those facilities, to sort of stay current in the marketplace, have to refresh periodically, and the roofs only last so long and things like that. So in this year's budget, I told the county board that we're really looking at, in the next 3 years, just to keep it in sort of current functional shape. It is a competitive industry. We have our sort of a separate niche in it. There's customers that we care for that some of the private ones don't necessarily want to have such volume of because they don't quite pay for themselves, sort of. And so what I suggested to the county board is that before we decide we're investing $4.5 million, we probably should step back and take a look at how has that market changed in the last 20 years, because it has. The industry has changed, the demographics of the population has changed, the pattern of people who were going to nursing homes, trying to stay more at home, more assisted living, all these different things, to make sure we're not investing in something that the market has changed its pattern from. I was really careful to point out that I was in no way suggesting that we needed to get out of the nursing home business. But we need to understand the nursing home business that we're in and make sure we're doing it sort of with a very conscious intent and knowing who we're trying to serve. Because there's direct levy, there's property tax dollars each year that support that facility. And when you engage in these the federal programs that provide a lot of the funding for it, you find you can't put a residency restriction to it. So although we've got property tax support, you don't have to just be a Walworth County resident to be able to go there. But it is a valuable community asset. So before we begin those projects, we are going to stop, evaluate it to make sure we know our place in the market, what our intent is, and to make sure that that's an investment we absolutely want to continue to be engaged in. I anticipate the answer will be yes, but I'm not entering that review with that intent. But the market's changed, the demographics has changed, so we need to do that evaluation. But right now our capital plan anticipates probably a refresh in the neighborhood of $4 to $5 million that needs to occur over the next 3 to 5 years. So I'm going to move on quickly and hit some of the ARPA-funded projects because it is very rare in this profession to have someone just turn around and say, "Here's $20 million. You know, what do you need to do with it?" And that was our allotment, a little over $20 million. We got it paid in 2 deposits over 2 years. The second one just came in last week. So the money's there ready to be used. We probably, as a county, got out much more quickly than other counties in what we're going to do with it. That was something we did intentionally because there is a deadline. You have to have it fully spent or contracted by the end of 2024, or you don't get to, you have to turn it back. I don't want to turn any of that back. We actually had a meeting Tuesday night where the county board spent 3 hours going over this list of projects. We do have 4 new supervisors. Things have changed since they first talked about them back in last July when the finance committee spent about, well, it was June, they spent about a little over 2 hours going through some project lists. So we've tried to keep things moving. The feds have made it exceptionally challenging to be able to spend their money. There was a resolution we had approved in July of last year that seemed so obvious. We were going to give a substantial amount of financial support to Open Arms, which was the only free clinic operating in Walworth County. And it does tremendous work. And frankly, it serves a population that is sometimes hesitant to come into our county buildings and get services. Not everyone being served there necessarily likes to deal with government, but their health is part of our community's health. And so before the rules were even understood, the county board said, yes, let's do this. And we had $100,000 last year and $250,000 each of the next 3 years, so it was going to be $850,000 just to help make sure they could bolster what they were doing. we're just now to the point, and we've worked on this extensively, to figure out how we can do it. The bottom line is we can't do what we envisioned being able to do. Just take advantage of the resource that's already there, plugged into the community. The federal rules just don't allow it. The restrictions they have and the bureaucracy they've attached to the money has caused a lot of extra work, and in this case, and a couple of these other projects I'll talk about, a lot of creativity. What we can do is we will, in the next month or so, be putting out an RFP, and we've got a new program of sort of community health services that we're going to be hiring a contractor that will be sort of services that are provided in the field, where we're out actually doing the work there. But we're calling it a community health-based care. We'll provide health care directly into the communities, create new access points, so you'll see some mobile setups in churches or in neighborhood areas, where we hope that can help establish some credibility with the underserved communities. The goal of that program will, over the 3 years, to identify and transition about 1,000 individuals from the community-based care to traditional clinic-based. But we couldn't just give the money to Open Arms and tell them to go do it. So we have to put it on RFP, and we're going to make this an open-ended RFP and try to get some other healthcare organizations to maybe submit proposals. We may award more than one. We may, I will be surprised if Open Arms doesn't apply, and because they've been thinking about how they could do this. So we're really excited to be able to take some of the ARPA money, and that'll be just short of $1 million of about $850,000 of it, and put it directly into some of the community health care for underserved population, because that is the population, the statistics show, are the people who have been most impacted by the pandemic. And this really targets the funding for precisely the kinds of things the federal government said you should be doing with the money. Despite their best efforts to keep us from being able to do it with the money, we figured out a way to actually do it. And I'll use another example and point out one of the constraints. It's not just the federal government that gives constraints, but despite the federal government giving this guideline to say what you can spend and say, you know, invest money in homelessness, invest money in the housing needs, invest money in healthcare. The things they allow us to do still have to meet state statute and what a county is allowed to do. And a lot of people don't understand the restrictions on a county. If you look at what municipalities do, municipalities have something called constitutional or statutory home rule. They can spend money and do whatever they want as long as the statutes do not prohibit it. So they have really an open ability to engage in things they believe can impact the community. Counties are different. Counties have administrative home rule authority. We can only engage in things specifically allowed by the Constitution, the state Constitution, or by state statute. If there's not something in there that says we can do it, we can't directly engage in it. So I tell you that story because one of the first things I suggested to the county board was putting money towards helping the Community Action Agency replace the homeless shelter. If you're familiar with the county's homeless shelter, it's run by the Community Action Agency of Rock and Walworth County. It sits out on the western end of the county, and I believe it's a old rundown 1970s motel, and it needs to be replaced. It can't be remodeled, it just needs to be replaced. And there appears to be support on the county board to do it. We've It's listed in our project. We have some design money for this year. But the federal rules made it nearly impossible as well. We could pay some to remodel it, but not replace it. And anything we did had to be sort of proportional to the impacts of the pandemic. So since they were operating beforehand, the federal rules said, well, what you can really do is, if they need to expand it, you can help pay for that, but you just can't build them a new one. And then once we tried to figure out what we could do, we were also handcuffed by the state rules that said, no, paying somebody else to run a homeless shelter isn't something counties do. Luckily, there is one sentence in the statutes that says it's not homeless shelters that we can't. We're not authorized for homeless shelters, but we are authorized to provide, to promote and support community action agencies. If you're not familiar with community action agency, the one for Rock and Walworth County is actually was created by the two counties together. So they operate a variety of federal programs on our behalf. We appoint board members to them, but they're an entirely separate organization. But we've really never engaged with them in direct funding of any sort. But there was a sentence that says we can provide them support and promote and support them. And we can give them money to promote and support them. But the way it's written, it implies, according to our corporation council, that as long as we don't give them money for capital or operating budgets. Now, I don't know how many of you are accountants in here, but there isn't anything but capital and operating. It took us quite a while to find out how to identify expenditures that were neither capital or operating. So we've decided we're using the term financial assistance. And what we're hoping to be able to do is be able to do things like when they build this new facility, that hopefully they'll be able to find the direct funding from other sources to do. We're going to buy, hopefully, those pieces that aren't part of the building as it's built, but they need to open it. So the beds, the mattresses, the desks, the pots and pans, the computers, all those things that they won't be open yet, so they're not operating, and it's not part of the construction contract. So we found this little gap in the middle that was neither capital nor operating. We can also give them some assistance, and we've sort of decided, and the Corporation Council is comfortable with this, that for ongoing projects that they're already doing, we can give them some funding to support that. And if we're only paying up to about 20%, we're not really doing the whole program, we're just assisting them, and then hopefully giving that money will free up resources they have that they can put to their capital project. So that's the, we actually just shared that with the county board at that 3-hour meeting we had earlier this week. I think we're going to be able to try and get somewhere between $600,000 to $1 million of financial assistance to them over the course of the next 3 years that will then hopefully get them about half the funding they need to really get started on being able to do that. I know we're winding down a little bit here. About how much more longer do you want me to go? Another 5 minutes? Okay, so I'm going to talk about a couple, quickly run through some of the things that we're doing with the ARPA money, the funding that I think is interesting. One thing we did with WCEDA, Derek's working on, we hired WCEDA to do a child care study. Child care isn't something we really engage in. It's not a county service we provide, but it is a key issue in front of much of our business community. Derek invited me to participate in a meeting on supply chain issues, and they spent a lot of their time talking about childcare because supply chain became a workforce issue and workforce became a childcare discussion. Probably half the meeting was talking about that. I don't know that the county's going to be able to directly engage, but this seemed like a way to get some localized data that would then give maybe workforce development, whoever decides to pursue it, some good data to help them get grants that are coming out at the federal and state level to support child care. A program I'm very excited about that I want to mention, because I talk about this about whenever I can, because I think it's something the county is clearly doing right, and that's our Embedded Crisis Liaison Program. We started this last year with a 2-person pilot program, putting one of our essentially social workers right in the local police departments of Delavan and Whitewater. And it was immediately successful, both from the Health and Human Services standpoint, where we're identifying people in need of services that would not otherwise show up until they're sitting in a courtroom or a jail before we realize that the service is needed. What the local law enforcement is finding that benefits them is they can get back to policing. Yeah, when law enforcement gets called to a domestic event of some kind, they can spend 3 or 4 hours there just trying to sort of calm things down. They can get there and see what's happened here isn't something that's going to be criminal. Nobody's going to jail tonight, but they just can't walk away from what's happening there. And the police officers and sheriff's deputies tend to be a sort of a Swiss Army knife. They have to do a little bit of everything, including social work. But that's not really what they're paid for. But having a social worker who, once law enforcement has made the determination that it's safe and there's no criminal event, social worker can take over, law enforcement can get back on the road, and we can get people plugged into potential services they need. And it's been a very successful program. And so when we got to this year's budget, I said, let's not make it a pilot program, but let's expand it. Let's make it a full division. We've now got 4 people all in place. Those 2 communities, we've added Lake Geneva, and the Sheriff's Department had one. We've enhanced our mental health support in the jail. We've got a supervisor running it. We're partnering with a university that's doing data collection, so that at the end of the 2024 period, we've got a full division with data, and we can see what difference we're making. We're going to have to, we're already sort of strategizing so that we can build it and fund it ourselves going forward after that. But it's having a lot of success, and we're really excited about it. And the ARPA funding, which is going to be almost $1 million over the next couple of years, is what's really enabling us to do it not as a 2-person pilot program, but as a full sort of division, a full unit operating countywide. And very excited about that one. We're also trying, another area we're really impacting from a variety of projects is our radio system. The Sheriff's Department did 2 studies. One was done just before I got here, one was done while I was here, and we're already underway with a contract to replace the backbone of our communication system. And it will be a service that is used by all police and fire in the county. So we're building that next generation backbone right now. Within this project, within the ARPA funding though, we're also funding a CAD to CAD, which is communication aided dispatch, where our Sheriff's Department will be plugged in directly with Lake Geneva, so that we have the 2 can communicate well, and we can back each other up. If something goes down, we can operate both systems from one of the places if we need to. We're also going to be adding the next gen text to 911. That'll go in later this year. We added 3 new dispatchers. We funded one through our general ability of the county. Asked the sheriff to figure out how to fund one within his existing operating budget, and Sheriff Bicknell was able to do that, and then we funded one through ARPA. So as soon as all 3 of those are fully staffed and trained, by the end of the year, early next year, they should be able to turn on that service. That new backbone we're building will require everyone using the system to be on new, modern, high-tech radios so they can all communicate with each other, so that our connectivity is substantially expanded. And we've got 1.9 million of our funding going towards our radio replacement, but we also put $2 million in our ARPA money, 10% of it, that we're reducing the cost to the local municipalities. And they're going to have somewhere between, the original estimate was 3 million, we're trying to fund about 2/3. They've got a much higher requested for the number of radios. So once that is figured out, they'll have somewhere between 3 and 5 million, but we're offsetting those costs by $2 million. And part of it was we're specifically prohibited from using the money to reduce tax levy. But one way we could sort of impact tax levy indirectly was by helping offset these costs that local municipalities are going to have for the radios. So all of those pieces together, we've got probably close to $5 million of our 20 million going towards dispatch, the radio system, the backboard supporting municipalities. So those are some of the bigger projects I have, and I'll turn it back over to Derek. I thank you for your patience. The government budgeting isn't the most exciting thing to many people. I happen to like it, but so I appreciate your attention during this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. I appreciate the overview, and just real quickly, I have to tell you, when I'm talking with prospective businesses about the county and the fiscal health and just all the different departments that you mentioned, and that, it's definitely a strength, in terms of recruiting or businesses that want to keep their roots here and expand. So thanks for all the work that you're all doing. Okay, so our next presenter here is Tom Walsh from the Department of Workforce Development. Tom's great. Anytime if we're working on any kind of grant thing or we need information about labor statistics specific to Walworth County or anything, always willing to help. And you can always contact me and I can interface with Tom, and I'm sure Tom's open having you directly contact him. But do have his presentation up, and Tom, I can get you a little clicker if you want, but I'll turn this over to you, so thanks for being here.
Yeah, thank you for having me. And like I mentioned when I walked in, it's trying to kind of bring up that mental recall of being in front of people and actually holding a microphone instead of trying to figure out, or instead of just trying to figure out if anyone's paying attention. I kind of got accustomed to just assuming no one was actually listening to me. That made the presentations go a little better when you couldn't actually see anything. But anyways, so I'll do my best here. As Derek mentioned, I am a labor market economist. My coverage area is primarily the 7 counties in southeastern Wisconsin, which includes Walworth. So hopefully I'll be able to provide a little bit of a local perspective and just talk about some of the, I guess, more or less the current state of where we're at right now, or state of Walworth County, as you will. Anyways, being an economist, of course my first slide has to be an unemployment rate. I think there's something in the contract that says anytime you do a presentation, it's the first slide. So what we're looking at here is the long-term unemployment trends. Long story short, unemployment rates right now are very low. Right now the biggest questions I'm getting is where can we find workers? 10 years ago, it was the opposite. It was how can we bring in businesses, how can we expand employment opportunities. And that shows in the unemployment rates. When I was getting out of college, right at the top of that graph, after the Great Recession, and trying to find a job, and it's in a very different climate than we're at right now. But yeah, so my primary focus today is going to be more talking about the labor market struggles in terms of finding people, knowing that it's a very different conversation than it was 10 years ago, but that's more or less where we're at right now. So with low unemployment rates, one of the first things we think about is labor force participation. So if I take a little bit of a step back and go over what is an unemployment rate, in order to be unemployed, you have to be you don't have a job that are currently seeking work. And then the flip side of that is someone that's unemployed is someone that currently has a job, and together they make the labor force. So one of the first things you think of with, well, we have these low unemployment rates, where can we find workers? Your natural progression is to think about how do we bring people into the labor force. So at an initial glance, that looks like a gigantic opportunity. So this graph is the labor force participation rate for Wisconsin. As you can see, that line is pretty clearly trending down. And what that would naturally make you think is that we have a big opportunity to bring that back up to where it was. Unfortunately, it's not that simple. Some of the context behind this rate and behind this trend is that when we were looking at those higher labor force participation rates in the mid to late 90s, that was a point when the baby boom generation was in their prime working years. Where we're at right now is a point when the baby boom generation is steadily exiting the labor force. So the oldest baby boomer is, I believe, 76 years old. The youngest is 57. So 65 isn't necessarily the end-all be-all for retirement, but if you use that as just kind of a guideline, naturally you're at a point where the baby boomers are largely exiting the workforce. And that shows up pretty clearly when we look at labor force participation rate by age, and seeing that it is very steadily high up until about 55 years old, and at that point it starts declining fairly rapidly. So again, to kind of take that previous slide and looking at it, we don't have this easy solution in terms of how do we take care of our labor market crunch to bring more people into the workforce. That's part of the answer, but it's not like there's this huge number of people that are just waiting and looking to work. And this slide has a little bit more of the numbers on what we're looking at in terms of people that are not in the labor force. That bar of people that either want a job or people that are available right now, but for whatever reason not actively seeking work, again, getting back to that unemployment rate definition, in order to be in the labor force, you have to be actively seeking work. Those bars are very small. The bigger one is people that are over 55 years old. And I don't want to dismiss that group because there's an opportunity there, but we can't really expect people to work forever. And the opportunity is probably more in keeping those more experienced workers engaged in the labor force in some ways, even as they're not going to be fully participating in the way they were in the past. So with that kind of an outlook, one of the things that our Secretary of the Department of Workforce Development highlighted at a workforce development conference back in April was looking at 4 buckets of underutilized talents. So the 4 that she listed were veterans, individuals with disabilities, the justice involved, and then the underskilled or currently unemployed or out of the labor market group. That 4th group is a group that I'm going to try and talk about a little bit more, and hopefully dig in a little bit more and get some at least context and get some thought going on how we can work on that number 4, that bucket number 4. So first of all, I want to just take a look. So before we even think about what's going on or try and make any assumptions about what's happening, let's take a look at some numbers and just try and highlight some groups that are showing either a low unemployment rate or a high unemployment rate or a low labor force participation rate. So this is obnoxiously small and something I don't expect anyone to read.
And I could send these around.
And we can send this around and actually look at it. But if there was anything that was really worth highlighting, I would have made it bigger. But big point on this slide, there's some yellow highlights, but they're kind of few and far between. For example, on the left is the unemployment rates. The furthest column is Walworth County. So if anyone has just incredibly good 80% range to really be fully bring into the workforce. And really, we wouldn't want to expect that, or really wouldn't want people, working forever. So with that said, something that I've talked about in a lot of my presentations, really dating back pre-pandemic, is employment barriers. So I think this is something that took a little bit of a hiatus, but it has never really stopped being important. And now we're back kind of on trend and back and seeing some of the things that we were talking about before, and it's maybe even in a more urgent fashion. So the four that I like to highlight that seem to come up, regardless of the industry, regardless of the group, are childcare, transportation, housing, and then the new one, or actually I should say the first three are very universal things I've been talking about for a while now. More of the new one that I think has been kind of in the weeds, but has now very much in the spotlight, is broadband. So this is something that obviously came into the mainstream with the pandemic, and with the amount of virtual opportunities we have. So we don't know at this point exactly how many of these changes that we did out of necessity are going to become permanent, but I think it's safe to say that we will have an increased amount of technology and an increased amount of virtual opportunities. That's great. I mean, personally, as someone that works remotely, I absolutely love it. But where that becomes a problem is that you're limiting those opportunities to people that actually have access to high-speed internet. So I'll talk a little bit more about that, kind of one of the last slides, and what that would mean. So first of all, childcare. So this is coming from the Pulse survey that the Bureau of Labor Statistics started doing as a response to the pandemic to try and get a little bit more current and real-time information. I'll be the first one to admit that a lot of the data sources that I have available to me and that I provide to you tend to be somewhat out of date. In the past, it's never really been much of an issue because we were looking at long-term trends. With the recent situation we had, it very much was an issue. This slide is showing people with children under 5 years old, and how many of them had a childcare disruption. I think that's pretty gigantic to see that in a week in Wisconsin, 45% of households and for that specific week had a childcare disruption. There is a more recent data set with week 44 and week 45. Week 45 was all the way down to 15%, which in some ways you look at that and you say, oh wow, look how this is trending down, but then you take a step back and look at it and think about it a little more, and think if you're talking about 15% of households with a child under the age of 5 years old had some kind of a childcare disruption. Put that in the perspective of your workforce. It is a difficult decision to make on whether or not you fully enter the workforce when you know that you're going to have childcare disruptions from week to week. So I think to really try and make that more digestible, there has to be a way where potential workers are ensured that they can handle their childcare obligations without losing their job. What that means, I'm not sure how you continue to do that, but that's just something that I would say is something to think about for future economic development. In that we need to ensure that one, people have opportunities for childcare, or two, when there are disruptions, they're able to take care of what's obviously more important to them. So the next one on childcare is just a little bit on cost. So this is typical costs for childcare. These obviously could vary greatly, or could vary by different areas. I'm very much not an expert on childcare or childcare providers, but I just wanted to point this out and to put some perspective on this, that if you're the average machinist in Walworth County, you're going to be spending about 25 to 30% of your annual income on childcare, and that would just be for one child. So that kind of gives you a little bit more of a thought on, okay, so if you're looking at going from part-time to full-time, but going to full-time means that you would have to put your child in full-time childcare, it becomes a difficult decision to make. One point I don't have on here is access to care, and so that I think there's maybe a great plug for one of the sessions that you have on the agenda today, and talking about that's another issue when it comes to childcare, along with cost. There are some access challenges that we're currently facing. So next is transportation. I don't have a ton of great data on transportation or transportation barriers. The data point I put up here was just to show how many workers are driving to work, and this is pretty universal in Wisconsin. And really, I mean, overall, nationally, the biggest way that people get to work is they drive alone. Just objectively, what that means is that if you don't currently have a car, it makes it difficult to get that job that would allow you to make the money to get a car. So I put this up there as somewhat of a, just as a point that if there are good opportunities out there, getting people to the point where they can get a car becomes a way of actually bringing people more into the labor force. And again, that bucket number 4 of having that fully utilizing your talent. Along with that, you can look and have further discussions on other options, whether it be carpooling or public transportation, which again I think is another good plug for the transportation section on the agenda. Next point I wanted to bring up was housing. Housing table here is looking at how much of household income gets spent on either a mortgage or rent. The point to highlight is looking at how the renters are spending a higher amount of income on their rent than the homeowners are spending on their mortgage. Just to full disclosure, I'm not certain how this has changed over time. Also the point would be that if we looked at the numbers, it's most likely that the amount of money that the homeowners are spending on a mortgage is higher than the amount of money that the renters are spending on their rent. But as a percent of income, people that are relying on that are in the rental category are spending a higher amount. Just as a frame of reference, one of the benchmarks for amount of income that should be spent on housing is right around 30%. Again, not really my primary area of expertise. I'm not sure how that number came to be, but if we use that as a reference point, you're looking at about 40% of renters that are spending higher than amount of rent in Walworth County, which is actually slightly lower than your neighbors. And then finally, broadband. So broadband is really a discussion on in two different directions that really kind of come to the same result, where if you don't have access to broadband, you'd have trouble taking care of those virtual opportunities. So direction number 1 is the last mile. So that one probably gets a little bit more conversation. So last mile being areas that physically don't have the infrastructure to bring high-speed internet into the home. And then the second part of that is the last foot. Actually, I think it's either the last foot or the last inch. I never can remember which one I use, but it's really the same point. So with the last foot being people that are in areas where they have access to high-speed internet, but can't afford it, so they can't bring it that last foot into the home. Walworth County likely has challenges on both directions of that, and I don't have the access map up here. The table I have is people that have broadband based on their income levels, which is, I think, a good point of conversation. Just being that we do have this increased number of virtual opportunities, and I think that's something we should really embrace. I think for a county like Walworth County, it could be very, very beneficial in that you have more of the benefits of being in a place that has more space and maybe an atmosphere that people are looking for while also being able to take care of these jobs, or take advantage of these jobs. But I think we have to have that in the forefront, have that in our minds, that we can't our potential workforce can't fully utilize all these opportunities if they don't have access to broadband. So I hopefully kind of laid out some of the challenges we're facing. One point I do kind of want to come back to is that when we are talking about a tight labor market, the positive end of that is that workers are going to have opportunities. And in the past, where people might have felt stuck to a job, now people have maybe more empowerment in terms of trying to find not just a job, but finding the right fit for them. So I think sometimes in the negativity we get lost in that point. But that said, I think it is really important that we take on the challenges and just have an acknowledgement of the barriers that people are facing in order to try and get them fully utilized into the labor force and to try and find a great fit for them and a great fit for all our local employers. So I do have a little bit of time for questions left. If anyone has any quick questions for either.
Yeah, for either of you, yeah, so.
Yep. So I left about 8 minutes, so.
Okay,
And I'd even stay for 9 if it.
For either one of you, what's the population trends in Walworth County?
I haven't looked specifically at Walworth County, so I can't really. I'd have to go back and look at where the population is going. If we're just talking statewide population trends, it kind of comes back to that baby boom population. So overall, you're looking at an aging population. I believe statewide, the projections are that 65 and older population is expected to grow by about 44% by 2040, and the working age population, or the 20 to 64, is actually expected to stay about the same. So I think it's actually a decline about 1%. So just to sum it up, the kind of challenges really the state's facing and kind of the country as a whole is that you're looking at trying to produce more with the same number of workers.
And John, that's kind of what I remember seeing about Walworth County, about what he said. They're pretty flat for the working age, but most of the growth in that 55 and greater.
I have a question. Tom mentioned there are the 4 barriers to employment that he talked about. What's the county going to do about any of those? I can answer that one, Gary. Thank you for that great insightful question.
Did my job for me, thank you.
Because we do have some things that I didn't get to, so given the things Tom pointed out, I think it's important that I add on to these. I talked a little about childcare. We've just hired WCEDA to do that evaluation for us. We'll have some conversations about whether we can have some role, but I don't believe the money we have will likely be able to fit into our prioritization, where we're either directly in some way subsidizing providers or we're subsidizing the consumers. Some large counties may engage in that. I don't know that that's something the county will do, but we did engage in the study to try and be able to have a tool to aid getting maybe some grant funding and to be able to do that. Transportation, I talked a little bit about the shared ride. Since I've been with the county board has been very much in favor of it. We've worked during these last couple of years to make sure we could keep it open and running during the pandemic, when it's very difficult to get riders. We haven't been promoting it as we're coming out of the pandemic because we're trying to get ourselves in a position for that expansion. We're in the process of acquiring the vehicles. We've decided that we'll probably provide the gasoline as well and make sure our county pumps can handle it so that we can reduce our costs but also take things out of the risk factor that someone might have in deciding what to budget. If I put an RFP out there right now that was dependent upon the price of gas, who knows what kind of bids I'll get. So we're positioning ourselves for that growth when a new contractor, the same contractor may win the bid again, but when the new service starts next April, we're hopefully going to be in a position to then promote it and grow the service by adding about 70% of our rides are what we call subscription riders, people who need the same ride every day to get to work or get to school. And the feds say, no, you have to be less than 60%. And so, you know, I had some staff say, how do we get that number down? And the providers say, how do we get that number down? And my answer is, we don't get that number down. Those are people who need rides. We have to increase our service delivery so that we've got extra capacity where those people have their rides still, but that's at the 60% level. So we're working on that.
Can I ask a question about that? Because if I remember correctly, they have to schedule an appointment. So like if my car breaks down in the morning or it won't start and I need to get to work, I can't call that ride share. Is that correct, or is that going to change? Because that's what's going to increase the non-subscription.
Well, that's a matter of definition. You are expected to sort of be guaranteed a ride to call 24 hours in advance to schedule that, but we don't call that a subscription ride. The subscription ride are people who have their ride scheduled for the whole month. They know every day.
I can't call 24 hours in advance because I'm not going to know when my car's going.
You can, but we don't guarantee a ride. One thing, by increasing the number of vehicles we have and bringing down that subscription base, we will have more capacity to be able to handle picking up more of those people who call and say, I need a ride in 2 hours, or I need a ride now. The service by sort of federal design and state design is intended to be, if you call within 24 hours, we're going to fit you in. And right now I think we're at the 97% level as far as ability to do that. But I think that will go up when we increase our drivers so that we have more base, so all the subscription riders get it, and there's more flexibility.
Good for me to know. Thanks.
Before I answer that, I do want to make sure I comment on broadband and housing a little bit, because that's important. The county hasn't engaged. When I presented the budget to them this year, I had categories that said, county roads Walworth has not totally engaged in the past, and broadband is one of them. And we jumped in right away with our ARPA funding. The first thing we got there was we partnered with Spectrum and Edge Broadband to use our money to help leverage the state grants. And we ended up being successful in 2 of the 3. We were working with Spectrum. We were going to contribute $250,000, and they were going to put in a little over a $4 million project into that. And we thought having our money involved would increase their ability to win it. At the last minute, I suggested, right on the floor, I had done some calculations just beforehand and looked at the prior year's grants and realized we needed to improve our ratio a little bit. So I told Spectrum, you know what, we'll double our contribution to $500,000 and asked the county board to approve it, and he did that night. Spectrum called back 2 days later and said, well, if you're doubling yours, we will too. And they put in a $10 million project. Part of it overlapped a service area already being awarded service, so the PSC cut that out, but they got the grant. Spectrum is just about to start a $7.5 million project serving areas across the county, but primarily 3 out here in Richmond County, south side of Lake Geneva, and then areas sort of headed from the southwest to the northeast between Elkhorn and Lake Geneva. And that's about 1,600 houses, and it turns out being the 5th biggest of the 77 projects that the state's participating in. We also had another small project, just a few $100,000, that we threw in $25,000 with Edge Broadband. Told the county board at Tuesday's meeting that we probably won't be able to use the full $2 million that we're trying to dedicate of our $20 million towards broadband in just leveraging state grants. There's not going to be enough time in the state grants. And that I think we need to actually offer our own grant that parallels what the PSC is doing and subsidize provider input. That's the way all the states and the federal government are all doing it, saying how much do we need to pay of your installation costs for you, a provider, to run broadband in this area where it's not economically feasible. The going rate in the PSC is, depending upon where it is, it's 30 to 50% of the cost to get that last mile. And that's what these programs are doing. So we've got right now $2 million. If we run a program and put an RFP out there, which I expect we will have to do, and what I told the county board, that's the only way we're gonna be able to likely spend our $2 million. So we're working on the broadband area, which is new for us, but we've made some serious gains already with these programs of Spectrum. And lastly, on housing, the county, created a housing authority, and it's been around for a long time, but we've never really provided them direct funding. We're using $1 million of our ARPA funding to help them acquire. There's a lot of apartment buildings that are moving off of some of the federal programs that they've signed up for that help maintain what used to be called affordable housing. I think they're trying to have you call it workforce housing now. Whatever you want to call it, is housing needs to be affordable. And right now, we've got $1 million in our plan to help the housing authority. And what they're looking to do is acquire some of these buildings, leverage the $1 million we give by only using about 30% down, so that they can actually spend about $2.6 million to acquire some buildings to keep them in. If that works and is successful, we're going to move all our money up to the front end so they have time to find these buildings. Then I'll probably be recommending the county board add some more to it if we still have it available within our $20 million. So those four you mentioned, I didn't plan this. We're actually things that we've got in our budgets and things we're working on. So sorry, long answer. Great question.
That's good. I think there was another question there. Ma'am?
I'll just hop over with some information that I'm
Okay, great. I know we're just a couple minutes. Any other questions? Yes.
Just one more quick one on the rescue plan. I was kind of racking up as you were talking. It sounds like about 40 to 50% of the 20 million is allocated to the programs that you covered here. Understanding that the specificity is probably to come between now and 24. Are there other big priorities that comprise that remaining 50 to 60% of the 20?
Well, I didn't list everything. So we started with a list of over 50 projects in the June, July time of last year. And in the budget, we put in a full list of pages, over 40-something projects, and we had all but about $1.5 million allocated. In that time, we've got about another 1.7 million that we've since determined we've either figured out how to do without spending it, or there's a substantial one that we got some other funding to help the nursing home. So we're back to the neighborhood of about 3 million that isn't already scheduled. In the final rule that came out, the feds have really opened up the ability to allow you to use it towards roads. I talked to you about some of the challenges we're going to have on our road structure. I did ask the county board to approve a road design that they're working on right now, so that we had a sort of shovel-ready project on the shelf. So when these federal grants came around, we could try to get that. In the end, as we look at the priorities, we've got that and some of the infrastructure for the installation of the radios, which is about a $18 million project for the county as a whole, that if there's, I'll call it money left over, we could offset some of those substantial costs. If the local municipality radio costs really are a lot higher than they originally estimated because they're not reducing it, we may have to further subsidize that. So I intentionally tried to leave some things unscheduled so that if the county board wants to do something else doesn't have to be cut. So, but right now, we're planning on 1.5 million unscheduled. Right now, we're about 3 because of some other savings.
All right, well, thanks. I know we're a few minutes over here. Hopefully you all have a program and you can see that we have other sessions after this. Hope you'll stay for those. I think the next one that we have in here will be on housing, and I think cybersecurity just across the way. There's plenty of, I think, refreshments down the hall there too. So again, I want to thank our presenters for being here, thanking Whitewater for allowing us with the center, and hope you'll stay for the other sessions. Thank you.